Over the last 3 years alone, I've been able to do over $60 million in sales with my businesses. And in today's video, I want to show you guys all of the different mistakes that we made, where right now, this year alone, we're trying to pace to get to $50 million a year in sales. Over the next 2 years, our goal is to be at over $100 million a year in sales. And that's really what I'm documenting on this channel, is the journey of getting there. But we made so many different mistakes in the last 3 years that I think if we didn't make those mistakes, we would already be at the $100 million a year mark. And I want to really help you guys understand those different pitfalls which I undertook, so that hopefully you guys that are on the journey of scaling up your businesses can avoid those different mistakes. So in today's video, I'm going to go over 9 different lessons, the key lessons that I think we went on and veered off on these different distracting paths that not only hindered the growth of our business, but more importantly led to me becoming burnt out and stalled at different points personally and also professionally, obviously, with the business. And this is all within the last 3 years. But the way that I describe it is, when you're in business and you're an entrepreneur, every year is like a dog year. So, 1 year equals 7 years of like the average normal person. So the last 3 years, although, it's only been 3 years, it's been so much learning and so much growth, but also so many different mistakes that we've made. So really, I want to uncover everything for you guys and be fully transparent. Lesson number 1 is that running multiple businesses is a distraction. So in my case, I do e-commerce and we were running multiple different brands. So I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory to this and then go through the lesson that we learned over here and also what led to me becoming burnt out and hindering our growth. So really, when we first took off about 3 years ago, I have a few different partners that we run this business with. We launched a product. We were able to scale it tremendously fast. We were able to get it to about $2 million a month very quickly. We started scaling up. We launched another product, and before we knew it, we were already at $6 million a month, scaling super rapidly. So what we took out of that is not doubling down on the products that were already working for us. We took it down that we understood a marketing method that allowed us to scale. So we wanted to utilize that marketing method to then try and scale out a bunch of different products. Now, the thing that we did with this is we weren't launching products for the same brand. We were doing it all in different sectors and different niches, and we started to have a bunch of success. So when we launch a product, we would have super fast growth, get the product up to usually 6 figures a month within the first, month or two of launching it. That was kind of the bare minimum of what we would consider even like a success point. And we started doing that. And at one point, I think we were at 6 different products scattered around, where the core products that got us to that $6 million a month initially started to have major declines, while all these other products were starting to get some momentum. And, but the main ones were falling back, and our blended revenue levels were going down as a whole. So the lesson in that is that as you start to grow, you're going to compound a lot of different skills that are going to allow you to grow. And usually it's going to be something in the form of marketing, especially if you have hyper growth. You're going to understand how to grow a company, grow a brand very quickly. So the temptation in that is going to be taking that skill set and then trying to apply it on the same different thing. Because, my example being e-commerce, when I learned how to scale a product, I figured that I could do this over and over and over again on all these different products, but I was so unmethodical about it that I started to do it in all these different niches and all these different lanes that all of the growth, first off, was separated. So if I were to just hyper focus on the one product that was working and continuously just figure out how to get that better and better, the growth would have compounded, the valuation of the business would have compounded, and everything over the last 3 years would have been in a much different place than I am today if I wouldn't have spread out my focus and spread myself too thin. Now, instead, it kind of took us that loop to understand that, and then we pretty much had to cut all those different products and go back to, okay, these are the 2 products, 3 products that are actually working. Let's be hyper focused on this. Let's be hyper focused on this brand. And now we're going on that trajectory of getting to, hopefully this year, $50 million a year. And then over the next 2 years, $100 million a year. But if we would have done that over the last 3 years and just been focused on the one that we already had that hyper growth with, we probably would have already been there. So there's a huge lesson in that. And then the other part of it, of me on a personal level, this caused a ton of burnout, because as I started to do all these different products, there started to be all these different failures. We started to not understand exactly where to go. It also caused me to be super unfocused and distracted, that almost at some points it was like analysis paralysis of, although I was doing stuff and felt productive on all these different things, I wasn't actually productive because I wasn't moving the needle on the things that needed to be moved on the main products. And that's really a tough place to be in as a founder, as you're growing and your mind is scattered across all these different things. So hopefully there's a big lesson in that. That's lesson number one. Now, lesson number two kind of piggybacks off of lesson number one, is to think about returning customers and not just new customers that come in the door. So early in my business career, I was a very good marketer. So going back to, the hyper growth and all that different stuff, we were able to have that type of growth, and we were able to do that all on new customer acquisition, which is pretty rare, where we were making all of our profit at that type of scale just on the new customers that we were bringing in, doing multiple millions of dollars a month in sales, bringing in new customers and not thinking at all about the returning customers. So it took me a very long time to then realize that all of these customers that were paying that acquisition cost, there's so much more value on the back end. Like probably there's 70% more value of what we could have extracted on all those different customers on the back end, which we weren't utilizing. So we're doing all that growth, but we probably could grow the business by 70%, which isn't just 70% growth. It's also, once you start to factor in all of the profit and all of the different effects of that, and then you take that onto the front end, you can also scale much further. So you can also spend much more on your ads because now you have all that profit that's coming from the back end. So it completely changes the entire dynamic of your business model and the way that you think about growing your business. And this probably sounds very obvious to most of you guys that are already doing it, and maybe for the guys that have already, listened to most of the content that I've been putting out, but it's not so obvious when you're a really good marketer and you can acquire customers, at a 2 ROAS on Facebook, and you find a really good product or you find a really good arbitrage method. And by the way, this doesn't only apply for e-commerce. This applies obviously for any type of business where you have a way of getting those customers. But when you bring in those customers, if you can focus on giving those customers a really good experience, giving those customers a really good product or service, which you're actually selling them, and figuring out the marketing aspects and elements of giving them things that would be accommodating or valuable to them once they already have your product, that's how you actually start to build a real business and get value out of your returning customers that are much more valuable than those new customers, because you don't have to pay for them again. So this was a huge lesson that now obviously we're incorporating. If you guys have seen any of my content as of recent, where our whole business model is based on this premise of building a subscription program, figuring out how to maximize the value of customers that are already in our business and maximize lifetime value rather than just thinking about the average order value and the first order purchase. So this has completely changed the dynamic of our business. And also, going back in hindsight over the last 3 years, if we would have focused on this, when we had, $6 million a month, $4 million a month, always scaling at those multi-millions a month, where we were only focused on customer acquisition, if we would have thought about all of the returning customer effects of that, then, the way that our business would have panned out would be completely different than where we're at now. This leads into lesson number 3, which is, I would say 99% of the time, it's better to focus on what's already working for you and figure out how to improve that and how to amplify that and how to increase the quantity plus the quality of whatever that thing is that's already working in your business, rather than trying to go and expand somewhere else. Obviously, there's times where expansion is going to make sense and you're going to have to scale, but for most of you guys, especially like sub $100 million a year, it's usually going to be the fundamental things that are going to get you to that level of scale. From the experience that I've had, growing to the level where we're at, and then also, founders that are already at 9 figures a year who I've spoken to, this lesson is, the core things that are driving your business, which will usually be like meta ads, good creatives, very well optimized funnel, figuring out, the back end and remarketing to your current customers, doing all of those basic simple things that aren't that sexy, that you already understand are the things that move the business, and just figuring out how to increase the quantity of that and improve the quality of those different things. That's going to be ultimately what's going to grow your business more than anything else. So you can try to, stack on, this different channel over here, or you can try to go into this new market over here. And all of those things, obviously, they can create the growth, but usually you're going to get much more benefits of just doing more and better of the things that have already worked for you. And this is also another rabbit hole which I went on in our journey, where I've probably advertised on most of the different marketing channels, and there's a lot of leverage from having a multi-channel ecosystem. So I think it's figuring out what that multi-channel ecosystem is for you, picking that ecosystem and then tripling down on that. So for us, it's been kind of a combination of Meta, Google, Amazon, and those are kind of the primary ones which we've utilized, and kind of just staying fully focused on there until you're at, the growth level where you can get out of those different channels, which really you're not going to have a ceiling, below $100 million a year, assuming you're in a pretty big market with just those channels alone. So picking on those, being focused on those, being focused on your market, if United States is your main market or the big four is your main markets, you don't need to start expanding into all those different markets. So figuring out what that core fundamental growth set is for you, and then being super focused on optimizing that to the full extent, rather than, trying to tack on this new channel, trying to test, that random channel, trying to go, worldwide fully, all of those different things. There's hidden costs which you might not be understanding. So trying to expand, internationally means that you have to figure out logistics and shipping components that will allow you to be able to do that in the e-commerce sector. And those are all costs that go against your initial inventory, which you're trying to grow and scale within your main market, which is in the United States. And same thing applies if you try to test a random channel. That budget that you're putting into testing and trying to validate a new channel is budget which you could be spending on your core channel, which you already know you're efficient at, and probably could scale it further if you just start to focus all that energy on just making better creatives and optimizing your funnel to allow you to extend your budget on the core channel, which you already know has that additional reach, and making that work. So those are a few examples, but I'm sure you could think about this in a lot of different areas of your business where you probably thought about trying to expand, probably thought about trying to go in a different direction, where that lesson for me has been where I've tried to do that. I've always end up burnt out, seeing something not work, being, let down on that, where also wasting all of that time of trying to do that venture where, once I had that core set, being super focused on it and scaling that up. All of this kind of ties into point number 4, which is to think about your business as an asset, not just as a cash grab, which, goes back to the earlier days when I was scaling up very quickly, growing very fast. We weren't thinking about the business as an asset. If we were thinking about the business as an asset, we wouldn't have tried to expand into all these different product lines in different categories, essentially all different brands, where none of that compounds into the asset. Because if we thought about the business as an asset, we would think about doing things centralized into one brand. In that one brand, stack multiple different products within that brand so that all the sales that we're making from those different products all centralize right back to that brand, so that the growth that we have and the compounding effect that we have helps the valuation of that singular business. We would have thought about growth completely differently, where we wouldn't have tried to scale up rapidly, where we wouldn't be able to sustain those rates, because that completely kills the value of a business. When you do that and you have a declining year, which is what was happening to us because we were expanding into all these different products, that the core products which we were scaling start to go down in sales. So although we were having, good years on paper the year prior and still decent years the following year, it was less than, where we were at that first year. And a declining growth rate, even if it's, $20 million a year or $30 million a year going down to $20 million a year, that still doesn't look good in the eyes of, the value of a business itself. So those are all things that we weren't actually thinking about when we were growing and trying to have that fast-paced growth, that if we were looking at our business as an asset itself, we would have thought about all those different things differently. And also the other piece of it is that you want to leave value for, if you're looking at your business as an asset and eventually you want to sell it one day, there's things that you also want to leave as meat on the bone for a potential buyer. So for example, not spending that effort to go into those new markets, if we would have done that early on, then, and which anyways, we ended up reverting back to just the USA market. But those are things that, you can show to a buyer, say, we have all this room for international expansion, not trying to, crack into retail too early. You can show that to a buyer and say, here, there's room for, retail expansion. So thinking about all these different things and how you can increase the valuation, monthly recurring revenue, that's predictable revenue. That's something that buyers will want to like. And even if you don't plan to sell it, still thinking about your business as an asset will allow you to maximize the overall value that you can extract out of your business over the long run by, building the valuation, being able to, potentially take loans against your business. There's a lot of different things that come out of it when you start to think about your business in that sense, which, it took us way too long to actually start to do that. So that's a huge lesson that now, in hindsight, looking back over the last 3 years, I wish we did that, when we first started growing and first started going into, hyper growth phase. And for point number 5, I kind of just said that a bit in point number 4, but it's a little bit different. So I want to go a little deeper on this, is planning your business with an exit in mind. So again, like, you might not want to exit in the foreseeable future. You might want to run your business over the long run. But I think thinking about your business from the perspective where you do have an exit in mind, or a place where you can exit, and then at that point, obviously, you can decide if you want to exit or not. It will completely change the way that you set your growth targets and how you try to grow the business, and the pace of which you grow it. Because if you have that exit date or exit timeline in mind of when you're starting the business, then you're going to want to pace out your growth very strategically, rather than just trying to scale as aggressively as possible, let your sales fall back down, try to go back up. So if you think about it in a way where you have this exit target in mind, it means you're going to have a more stabilized growth plan. It means that you're going to have to be very strategic with how you set up your cash flow and how you try to, manage setting everything up to get to that growth plan. It's going to, set you up to really think about what are the most valuable things you can do in your business and where to actually put your focus. So having a subscription program, that can be super valuable. Having multi-channel approach, that can be super valuable. Having multiple products within the brand, that can be super valuable, because you want to pretty much have as much diversity as possible within a single, business entity, so that it negates the risk for a potential buyer. So it will make you focus on those different things, where if you're not thinking about that and you don't have that in mind, you're kind of just going to go whatever, looks like is the route that can get you the most money right now. And a lot of the times that's going to directly combat against the goal of ever wanting to have an exit. So you want to build your business in a way that if you do want to exit at some point, you have the option to actually be able to do it. Where if you don't think about this, then I can tell you it's going to be 90% chance that you're not going to be able to exit the business, or at least be able to exit the business at a price that you would want to. So that's a huge lesson, which I learned with one of our brands, where we're in the process of trying to exit it. And there's been a lot of lessons that we had along the way, because there's nothing worse than taking your business to market where, this was a multi-8-figure brand that still was a multi-8-figure brand, but we had a declining year in sales with this brand. And then when we were trying to take it to exit, there's so much time sucking and so much drainage that happens when you're working back and forth with a broker to ultimately not get the price that you actually want and deserve on that business, that it then just makes more sense to keep on growing it yourself. Where that whole time suck, again, that's something that's going to drain you if you're not thinking about this in mind, and something that led me personally to being at burnout at multiple points, because of all the time suck I had in that process while also trying to run the business. So there's a huge lesson in that. This leads to point number 6, which is set realistic projections in your business that are all rooted in data. So the reason why I give this point as a specific point, which is different to all the other ones, is also early on when I was growing our business, we were just being very sporadic with how we would grow, right? We had a month where we do 6 million, then the next month it was 4 million, then maybe 2 million, then back to 4 million. So it was very sporadic, very unintentional with how we were growing. And although we had amazing growth, it wasn't actually planned out or paced out in a correct way. And also when we would set projections, it was more like very high in the sky, types of projections, where we would say, our goal, we want to do $100 million a year, or we want to do, X amount a year. So doing all of that and setting, unrealistic goals without actually having, the pieces in place to be able to sustain that type of growth, because to get to $100 million a year, there's a lot of planning that you need to have. You need to understand what your cash flow aspects will be of how you're going to maintain that type of growth. You're going to have to make sure that you can, plan in advance the amount of inventory you need to order and the amount of units you need to order in advance for that. You need to understand what your key metrics and key targets are going to be on the different platforms, and also have a plan of how you're going to maximize customers when they come in the door from a lifetime value perspective, and know what all those numbers are. So early on, we weren't doing it like that. We were just saying, this is our target, this is, what we're trying to get to. So the point now, and the way that I look at it now, is completely different, where now it's all based on what's our previous data, what's our previous cycles, what can we realistically achieve, how are we going to, get to those targets, what are we going to do from a cash flow perspective, how are we going to plan that to be able to get there, how are we going to order the inventory to, make that pace out in a way where we want to grow it, what's our, monthly recurring revenue numbers and cohorts going to look at, and if we pace out at these numbers, which we currently have based on our previous data, these are what the numbers are going to look like. So now the projections are actually rooted in something that's real. And now when we're setting our targets, it's targets that, are still pretty ambitious. And, I would never say to shoot for something lower than what you can actually, possibly achieve. And I think setting your North Star to be something very ambitious is a good thing, but it has to be rooted in data that's actually possible and plausible, not just something that's, high in the sky and doesn't make any sense. And again, this can be a point that's super obvious for a lot of you guys, but for me early on, this was something that I wasn't actually considering and thinking about. We were just running, off a cuff and setting, high in the sky goals that actually didn't track back to anything. So this is something that is crucial to actually being able to grow, that again, at different points for me, led us to being stalled and, really growing in a very unintentional way. All right, lesson number 7 also kind of ties into some of these different points, but it's a little bit different, so I want to expand on it. Number 7 is the more skills that you gain in business, which you will gain if you continuously, go in the process, learn, grow, iterate based on the different mistakes that you make. So the more skills that you grow and learn within business, the more opportunities that are going to come your way. Focus is what separates you out. So what this, really implicates is a lot of the meta lessons of everything that I went through over the last 3 years, so not being focused on the right things of, first off, we had something working, we started to focus on all these different products. We started to focus on all those different products, that we had channels that were working and a system that was working. We started to try to expand onto way too many other channels. We had, our main market that was working. We started to go in all those different markets prematurely when, we weren't actually maximizing the things that worked. So all of those different things that we started to do, those are, the examples of focus being diluted and then going into too many places, which then ultimately hurts you and hurts the growth. Now, other things that can start to happen is that, people will want to work with you. People will say, hey, can you, work on my Facebook ads or do an agency for me or do this or do that, which also early on in my career, when I had my own brand, that's what I did. I ended up starting, my brand, then I started an agency, then I was working with all these different clients at the same time. My main brand started to go to shit. So those are all different things where your focus is very scarce. And although you're going to have opportunities that are going to come your way, you have to understand what's actually the most important thing to you and what are you actually trying to achieve. And based on that thing you're trying to achieve, you have to protect that at all costs, because there's going to be so many different opportunities that are going to come your way. The better that you get at business, the more known that you become, that staying focused is a thing that's going to separate you from becoming what you actually want versus, becoming spread out and doing well enough, but not actually the thing that you wanted when you got into it. So that's a huge lesson. That's something that I tell myself every day, because, the same thing happens for me. And it's probably one of the most challenging things to do, especially when you're an entrepreneur and you have all these different ideas and all of these different things that you want to do, that staying focused is probably the most challenging thing. And that's what separates, I think, the greatest entrepreneurs versus the people that, end up pretty well, but not reaching their full potential, in all honesty. Okay, lesson number 8 is you can brute force your way to 7 figures a year and even 8 figures a year. So what I mean by brute force is you can do that without having, really any systems in place, without having, that many team members, very minimal types of team members, very little structure in your overall business. But that's going to be impossible to get to 9 figures a year without that. So this is something that the earlier you can embrace it, the better off you're going to be. Thankfully for me in my journey, this is something that I understood pretty early on, and I made a shitload of mistakes in this process. So I'll touch a little bit on that. But to get to the level where you want to be at, it's going to come down to creating systems around the processes that are actually working for you to some capacity at least. It doesn't have to be excellent systems. For me, I'm definitely more of, an operator, not as organized, more like have the spark myself, can make it happen. But you have to just embrace that to get to the level where you want to be, if that's 9 figures and beyond, which maybe that's not for some of you guys, and maybe, you're good with just being chill and, staying within that 7 to 8 figure a year mark, which, is not bad by any means. It's definitely a great standard. It just kind of depends on what your goals and what your ambition is. So I want to emphasize that it's not right or wrong either way. This is just something you have to embrace and understand if you want to get to beyond that level, where systematizing the things that already work, and then also having people in place to operate those different systems, and also getting people to expand on different ideas and not just rely on your own ideas to, pretty much multiply the force of really smart people doing that. So getting good at hiring, getting good at finding and recruiting good people, and creating systems around the things that are already working in your business, those two things come together to allow you to continuously grow past just, the low 8-figure mark of what brute force can get you to. So the earlier that you accept that, and the earlier you take on the learning curve of trying to hire people, making all these different hiring mistakes, losing a shitload of money probably in that hiring process because you don't know what good versus bad looks like. You don't know when to fire or let go from, someone that is bad. That's something that I'm still learning a lot every single day, but there was a huge phase of time where we grew, we scaled up, we started hiring a bunch of people. We realized that those people weren't the right positions. We didn't set up the proper, KPIs and clarity for those people. And even though a lot of those people might have been good people that we hired, because we didn't have the proper function and the right way of going about it, that led to, first off, a lot of dilution of focus because I was trying to focus on managing all these different people rather than doing the thing that was actually growing the business. But also, setting them up for failure where they had no chance of actually succeeding because first off, they didn't have the proper objective, they didn't have the proper KPIs, they didn't have the proper systems or guidance to be able to make a positive impact. So I made all of those mistakes early on that now I have a completely different understanding. So hopefully you don't have to make all those mistakes, but understand that it's going to be a learning curve. It's going to be a process that the sooner you can embrace it, the faster you're going to get to the place where you actually want to be. Lesson number 9 and my final lesson for today's video is for trying to uncover new things or for new discoveries, the strategy should always be to copy, then iterate, and then pioneer. And I think there's been points in my career where I didn't have enough experience to try and go pioneer something completely different or completely innovative. And I tried to do that and then it completely failed. And I think every single time where I've tried to do it, where it wasn't rooted in my experience and in my data of pioneering, I failed. So let me backtrack a little bit on this to make this all make sense. For example, for me, I wanted to start, an interactive doctor software. This was, really early on in my career where I started this. I had no prior experience pretty much in business whatsoever. I didn't do any market research or any ideas. This was all just an intuitive idea that I had that I wanted to launch and bring to the market. So I spent probably 7 to 9 months actually developing this type of software, then trying to bring it to the market, and then this completely flopped. So this is a very, simplistic example of how this all came out, but I tried to pioneer something that didn't exist in the market, that wasn't rooted in any type of data or any type of copying, quote unquote, or iterating, quote unquote, from any type of concept that was actually out there and working. And usually there's a reason why that is. So that completely failed. Now, could that have worked in, different circumstances or if I applied it differently? Probably. But the thing the lesson here in terms of what I'm trying to say is that if you have a business idea, if you have a creative concept, if you have a landing page, it doesn't really matter. There should always be something rooted in something that you're copying. So maybe it's a proven format from, a different competitor that's working. If it's a business model, maybe you're taking it from a completely different industry where you see an arbitrage opportunity of how you can make that business model work in whatever segment that you want to get into. So it should always be rooted in something that you're quote unquote copying first off. And then the second phase of it is then iterating. So once you kind of have that thing that's almost one-to-one of like a copying, it's figuring out where can I make improvements, where can I make adjustments, how can I iterate this a bit? And once you have success and once you start to have traction with it, that's when I think you can start to pioneer, because now you have the ideas, you have the infrastructure of something that's actually working and data to back it, where now the pioneered idea, right, the completely new and fresh idea, it's all rooted in something that you now already know works because you start to test it based on copying, iterating, and then going to pioneering. So now I pioneer different things all the time. I pioneered completely fresh and new offers that the market has never seen, but it's because I have this understanding that was all rooted for my previous experience and understandings to be able to get there. So I think a lot of people, especially early on in business, you think that, okay, I have this genius idea, I've had some success, let me, just try and do this completely new thing that's not rooted in anything. And that's usually going to be a mistake. Sometimes it might work, but I think it should always be rooted in something that leads to another thing that then leads to you being able to completely innovate and pioneer. So all in all, guys, these are 9 lessons that I've taken away over the last 3 years, but really, over the last 5-6 years of, doing this and being in the online marketing and business world, of lessons that I've taken away, different mistakes that I've veered off on, and definitely led to me being in burnt out positions, the business not being where I want it to be, and just not the best mental state overall to be in as all of those different things are happening. So now in hindsight, based on all those lessons, if I would have done all of that, you know, probably 3 years ago, I think my business for sure would be at $100 million a year and beyond that. And now I'm taking all these lessons for myself, applying that into my business. And hopefully in the next 1 to 2 years, I'll be catching back up and we'll already be at that $100 million a year mark. So there's always lessons. And I think that it's not to say that those things are bad, because I think making those mistakes turned me into who I am today and the understanding of business that I have today. And I think a lot of the times you need the scar to then be able to look at things in a different way and actually internalize it and process it. But hopefully, if you guys take anything away from this video, is know that those scars are real. Know that those things that I did are things that I really wish in hindsight I didn't do, and try to take this at face value for where you can and where you can apply it. And I think that you will get some good lessons and meaningful experiences out of it. So appreciate you guys tuning in to today's video, and catch me in. I'm trying to post 2 videos a week. So please subscribe to the channel, comment with, you know, any experiences that maybe are relevant for you guys on this, or any questions that you guys have.